we had you about a month ago when this national security legislation came into place. We've seen a lot of activity since then. Given what we saw yesterday, same time around yesterday, this time, we saw police, around 200, raid the Apple Daily headquarters, something that we really haven't seen before. What do the optics tell us now about press freedoms in Hong Kong moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think the optics of what unfolded here yesterday morning can't be understated. Hong Kong awoke to the news not only of, the arrest of its, probably most famous and prominent advocate for press freedom, but shortly thereafter, we witnessed hundreds of police, over 200 police descending on the newsroom, coming from dozens of vans, coming in to execute a warrant to search ostensibly the offices of the 7 individuals charged. But thanks to the wonderful live reporting of the Apple Daily reporters on the scene, we saw also police breaching the terms of that warrant and engaging in search of journalistic materials that would not have formed part of that warrant. So I think the optics are important because, well, when the police insist, for example, on handcuffing the leader of this organization, the perp walking him through his own newsroom in handcuffs, I think what it really lays bare is the very hollowness of the statements of not only the Hong Kong government, but the national security law itself in the provisions of Article 4, which provide for this respect and protection of press freedoms. You can't look at the images of Mr. Lai being perp walked in handcuffs through his own newsroom, and you can't look at the behavior and the sheer numbers of police sent to conduct this newsroom raid without having a very clear understanding that it would be intellectual dishonesty on the part of the Hong Kong government to maintain that press freedom is protected in Hong Kong in a way that it should be under the terms of our basic law and our international treaty signatories.
Police did say, though, that they would not target Apple Daily's editorial department. They're not going to target reporters. Is there a sense, perhaps, that this is only targeting Jimmy Lai himself, which, under this national security law, he was allegedly colluding with Western forces? It doesn't have that much impact when it comes to press freedoms?
The police did say, I should start by saying that there are 2 types of warrants in Hong Kong, and for the police to be able to seize journalistic materials, they would have required a separate type of warrant. But what we saw from the live stream, and indeed what we saw from the police Twitter feed itself, was police engaging in interference with journalistic materials. We had one of the police spokespersons telling us that they were seizing 250 boxes of documents from the newsroom on the basis that it happened to be located on the 2nd floor of Apple Daily's offices, and therefore on the 2nd floor where the 7 individuals who originally formed the charge of national security offenses, where their offices were located. So it is a clear overreach. We have police tweets that demonstrate this, and we have video footage of editorial and news desks being interfered with and materials being removed. And again, the search warrant itself, Hong Kong courts have long recognized that this is a very draconian mechanism. Search warrants are not given to police to further investigation. They are given as a mechanism of last resort. So my feeling is many of the materials that were seized on the day that this was, a lot of it was to induce fear, to go after Hong Kong's largest pro-democracy publication organization, to induce fear, to make other organizations, very reluctant to publish any information that might be considered, either dissenting of or contrary to, the views that the Communist Party wants to represent, and that includes views on democracy, apparently. So my feeling is that in the next few days, we will probably see some challenges, some legal challenges on the scope of the warrant, the appropriateness of the search, and whether the police breached any of the terms of the execution of the warrant, which I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we can answer that in the affirmative.
Right. Sharron, you call this classic lawfare. If there's been an abuse of the process, what's the recourse?
If there's been an abuse of the process, the recourse right now is in the next couple of days. The lawyers will be, the material itself will not be made available to the police. They will be sealed in a room where they do not have access to them for the purposes of investigation initially, and that is on the basis that that I believe that the lawyers will probably review and challenge the hundreds of boxes of documents that made their way out of the office. So right now, the recourse is that those materials are sealed and that the lawyers go in and try to appeal the decision of the magistrate to give or at least refine what is contained in the warrant that was granted. We know that there's not just national security laws, for example, that were engaged here. There were some additional, I call it lawfare because the police threw in some additional charges related to, I think, the use of the building and some corporate fraud on the basis of the occupier's license to use the building. So we don't know on what basis the warrant was granted, whether the warrant was granted on the basis of occupier's liability or whether the warrant was granted for the purpose of investigating the national security law. If it's the latter, then we have to get the court's view on how far the police are allowed to go in that investigatory overreach. So can a warrant cover things as wide as, the personal documents and notes of journalists on their desk, and also journalistic materials that are already constitutionally protected in Hong Kong and require a separate warrant process. It's not the case that a warrant that is issued on the basis of criminal charges in Hong Kong would include journalistic material. That would be a separate warrant.
Sharron, this possibly reflects what's to come. Do you see what we saw yesterday emboldening the Hong Kong police?
Unfortunately, I do. I think, this move, the Hong Kong police, as we've seen in the past 14 months in Hong Kong, are already dangerously emboldened. We saw police yesterday telling international and local media organizations that they were not allowed to attend the presser to discuss the newsroom raid. Police making statements that they would subjectively determine which media organizations were allowed to cover it, and suggesting to other journalists and to other organizations that they simply watch the Facebook live stream. So the police view of what good journalism is basically a good journalist would simply play the propaganda or live stream the police view on what happened during the raid. And of course, we know that this is not the case. We know that journalists don't serve as the mouthpiece of either governments or police agencies. And so the idea that the police are very aggressively, swiftly moving in on a news organization, sending 200 officers during a time when Hong Kong is facing the third wave of the coronavirus and we are limited to groups and gathering of two, this is a very aggressive move. And then, simultaneously refusing to allow or individually deciding which media get to report and saying they have new tricks. I believe what the media liaison officer said, that they had new tricks to determine which media organizations would be allowed to enter pressers and to ask questions about something as important as press freedom and something as important as the biggest newsroom raid in Hong Kong historically.
And Sharron, we've seen several events, right? Not just the raid on Apple Daily, the probe into public broadcaster RTHK. There's reports of even the immigration side of things, the department setting up a possible national security unit to vet for more sensitive visas. And this morning we got Xinhua reporting with Beijing calling for the FCC here in Hong Kong to stop denigrating this national security legislation. What are sort of the red lines that you think are being drawn right now? And do you see that Hong Kong journalists, will they still have more press freedoms than those in the mainland?
I mean, yeah, we did see, as I mentioned, the series of severe and swift attacks, and we woke, not just Jimmy Lai being arrested, not just the newsroom raid. We had last night news that an ITV freelance reporter had been arrested again under national security law. We saw the replacement of 2 directors of broadcast stations very early in the morning. And then, of course, yes, this new immigration department that's been set up. So that is a series of events so swift and severe that it's very, very clear what the focus of Beijing is right now immediately with this national security law. And that is to, put such fear in the media, whether locally or internationally, that reporting from Hong Kong reporters will begin to self-censor, that people will be afraid to come to Hong Kong. I think it's unfortunate because right now our feeling in Hong Kong is that the media are more critical to the cause of press freedom than ever. And, in a city which has been under a 24-hour attack on press freedom, where we've seen so many arrests, so many microaggressions against the media and reporting in Hong Kong, what we need is more sunlight. Sunlight is the disinfectant that we need. We don't know what the red lines are going to be. We certainly could not have anticipated on Sunday evening the series of attacks we'd see.